Good evening. You're listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show, the 2022 4th of July. Happy Tom Cruise birthday special edition of Top Gun from 1986. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight, I have RDV from the Great Midwest. And of course, I have the young, early 20-something Professor Pixel, the Generation Z or whatever the hell. I got to find some title for him, even though he doesn't deserve it, RDV. And you're, I guess, a millennial.
He's more of a rooster than he is a goose.
I would concur on that, but I have to sit there and say, recently we talked about Top Gun Maverick, the recent release. It just crossed $1 billion this weekend, one of the better movies this year, and the movie I thought was better than the original, so much so that we said, you know what, let's go back to the 80s delicious goodness of everything Americana and talk a little bit about a movie that was a lot bigger than probably what it should have been, but it encapsulated everything 1980s from patriotism, from homoerotic subtones, volleyball, oiled up people, and lots and lots of music video type things. And a special thing that I'm going to drill into Pixel's brain about how awesome the 80s were. I'm going to relate it to something we talked about earlier in our Prisoner stream. So ultimately, I'll start off by saying that I thought this movie was okay. It's not one that I'm a huge fan of when it comes to Tom Cruise films. I prefer others. I think it's a solid film, and I think it's a very 80s film. But RDV, I know you love this one a lot. So let me start with you before we go into Pixel for our initial thoughts.
This is one of the first Tom Cruise movies I've seen, other than I saw, what was it, Risky Business right after this. Both great movies. And I still say it's it's one of my most entertaining movies I can watch. The quotes, the cast. Just alone the fact that they're outside of this, there's really no other movies that really capture inside the jets. U.S. Navy, the Air Force. It was one of a kind, and still today, in the Maverick Top Gun actually said, you know what, we're gonna do what we did before and make it better. And it's weird. All these years, man, like 30 or 40 years later, and the fact that still no one has decided, you know what, we're going to be pro-military, pro-USA when it comes to like Air Force or Naval Air Force, I should say. It's just weird. So yeah, it's Tom Cruise. It's Val Kilmer, Michael. I think it's Michael Anthony Edwards. Can't remember. And he said, and then Karen McGillis. You got the principal from Back to the Future in here too. I think his name was Skinner. Can't remember. The music, it's just a sense of brotherhood. There's emotions in here. Obviously, it goes from being like a happy, good movie to like being like almost like a sad, and then and then you just get that like the last, even the music. Like I said, let's talk about the music first. Kenny Loggins, man. You got the Danger Zone. It starts off in the very beginning. It's like it just gets you so pumped. They're showing the jets taking off, landing, taking off, and there's actually real footage. This isn't like no Hollywood faked prop stuff. It's actually right there on the Freightliner, and then the carrier. Then you have later on the beach scene when they're playing the volleyball, dude. Any other music in that, I would just be like, oh man, this is horrible. But like the music helps it out. And then you got Mighty Wings by Cheap Trick. And when they're going after Michael Ironside and Tom Skerritt, doing the train stuff. It's just
so you liked it.
Yeah, quotable. Like I said, quotable lines, man. Music overall, it's just holy crap.
Yeah, good stuff. We'll dive into it with some specifics too as people start filling in here, but I want to get Pixel's take on it because he's the young one in here. He doesn't get it. Tell us what you thought, Pixel, on your watch. First time watching, you have to let us know.
And if he says it sucks, we're muting your mic.
Our job's to educate.
You use me as the young face, so I'm going to go ahead and use some modern terminology all the kids are using nowadays. Honestly, when it comes to the original Top Gun, I find it very mid. It exists.
Wow, you're killing me here.
I do not vibe with any of the songs. The only one that comes close is the one scene with Goose actually singing "Great Balls of Fire." That has some energy, but other than that, I get nothing from this movie.
You are dead to me.
I know what it's trying to do. I know what it wants to do, but it just doesn't hit. I think Top Gun Maverick is absolutely a great movie. So whenever you say, "Oh, we're going to do what we originally did, but do it better," no, they're going to do what they originally did and actually make it something worth watching.
Well, I want to tie this into something you
Wow.
and I talked about earlier tonight, reviewing The Prisoner on our Xtreme TV selection right now. We're halfway through that. And I said I wanted to relate it to a show from the 80s, and RDV, I'm sure you may have a thought on this here in a moment, a show called Miami Vice. The reason why it's important is because Michael Mann's particular style and look, and what I had said before on our Prisoner show was that we have a sense of us, like every episode's the same with the prisoner. It's just, okay, how is he not going to escape this
Yeah.
time? But the idea is that there's a mood that gets set with each one, and it's hard to replicate that. And by the 80s, Michael Mann was one of the first pioneers of really adding music into it and more of a mood setting for it. If you go back and you lived the 80s like I did, and of course you and I both are here in Central Florida, RDV's from the Midwest. For me, I remember Miami back in the 70s and 80s, and for me being up here in Central Florida, I go, yeah, that's what it feels like. And the fact that it's shot outside with natural light and everything too. We talked about how 80s movies relied a lot more on practical effects. Everything wasn't super digital like it is today, where you lose a lot of that. No matter what you try to do, you can only colorize and enhance and digitize so much, and it still doesn't look the same as capturing there. And this movie does a great job of it. But what's perfect about this movie is that it's a whole lot of ingredients all thrown together, and everybody, from the 80s thinks that's really, really great. And a part of me goes, yeah, anybody should be able to do this, because at this time you could throw all the stuff together, stir it up, and come out with something that was going to be easily digestible. And I've said many times before, Top Gun is the high mark when it comes to 1980s films, because after this one, in terms of 80s types films, I think they start to decline, and pretty rough so, because we're already
Yeah.
talking 1986. But you have Berlin, Take My Breath Away. My God, you could not get away without hearing it. It's this movie might as well just be a movie made because there's so much music as a movie video. So it was kind of like, well, what is it? Is it a movie? Is it a movie that's just about product placement? Is it just something where Tom Cruise can smile and look good and be all baby oiled up, and we have music in there to sell the product? It was the perfect intersection of all these different elements that made up gross, over the top commercialism that defined the 80s, much like Rocky 4 existed only because it's an 80s movie that had Rocky in it. Top Gun's perfect for that. I like it. It's okay. I get what you're saying by being mid, but I am telling you, this movie would be on a short list of 80s movies that you would put in a time capsule for people to quote unquote understand and get what the 1980s was all about. RDV, does that strike any tone with you?
I would say that this movie is, the way it captured everything in here is like lightning in a bottle. And they took a little bit out to make the second one, and make it more, they just improved on it. The technology improved on it. That's what made the second one so much better, is the technology. Having the GoPro cams actually in the camera, where they actually had the pilots in the thing there. So also I want to say that just like Ghostbusters, the exact same thing. You had all the right elements just perfectly working. You had all the right actors, the right sound crew, the directors. Just like it just worked. It was that, as I said, Pixel. I think if you would have grown up when I did, growing up a little older, you probably wouldn't have grown up with my music. So you probably would appreciate it more.
Let's talk.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, because I don't know Pixar. I don't know if obviously when you grow up, whatever you listen to around you influences your taste, right?
Yeah. So
well, certainly, yeah, it's the most formative decade. Yeah.
70s, what?
A lot of 70s. That's where most of my musical vein goes into, the 70s.
Well, no wonder we should talk about Charleston Heston then. Jeez.
Well, here's the thing I wanted to kind of bring up, because we do goof on you, Pixel, about being the young early 20-something here, and the idea here is that it's a different perspective from the people that listen to the Xtreme Movie Show. While we have people around the world in different age groups, a lot of people like our action film reviews. They also like classic and stuff. The thing with Top Gun that I cannot emphasize enough, that I think is lost, is in the 80s you still had a sense of patriotism. And I don't mean American and Reaganism, capitalism, while that's certainly true. It was there was a respect for certain institutions like people that were in the military. If somebody wanted to go in the Army or the Marines, it didn't matter what. It was like, oh, you're going to go in the military? Okay, that's cool. It wasn't looked down upon. Or even the reserves, let's say. If you had people that said, no, I'm going to go and get my degree and then go into the Air Force and then be a pilot, you might go, yeah, you sound like a stuck-up snob, but you still respected that. And this movie here almost glamorized what it meant to go into the military, and it made it cool. And that's one thing that 80s movies could do, is they could make nerds be cool. They could make zombies be cool, because let's be honest, even though we've hit critical mass for 10, 20 years now in zombies, they're not cool right now, and they just haven't been. But what can you have today from the 20-something crowd that is made cool in movies today? I seriously want to know, because Top Gun made this stuff be cool. What is cool today to the young folk?
I mean, I don't know exactly what you're going for here. I mean,
so when people saw Top Gun, they went, "Fuck yeah, I'm gonna go be a pilot. I'm gonna go in the military."
So what movies out today make you want to, like, or just like inspire you stuff like today or outside?
I mean, I would argue that actually the sequel to this does a better job of that.
Well,
I
think here's something real quick. You're talking about the sequel, so you're saying the sequel would probably inspire people. Now, the first movie made people actually enlist. They want to be pilots.
Oh yeah.
So you're saying the second movie is gonna make me want to go and be pilots?
I mean,
I think when this came out, this was during Reagan's second term, right?
Oh yeah, highest rating of all time, pretty much at this point, 85, 86. Things would,
Now the economy was much more different back then. I wonder where people actually want to go serve now with the different economy. But then again,
that's delving into politics. I'm talking about based off of emotion.
I'm talking about culture, economy. It was totally different in the 80s, man, versus today.
I mean, yeah, but at the same time, with the new one, it's what the original was, but more. Everything feels fleshed out, and you absolutely get a sense, like when in my theater for the release of the second one, we had people in our row who were just fully engrossed. Like whenever the crash, there were gasps and there were cheers. It's a lot like feeding into.
And I'll tell you why they're cheering, because they took an awesome movie and just said, that's awesome. Let's make it even more awesome. And that's why people are just. You had people coming in who watched the fans of the first movie, dude, coming in there. We got what we wanted for a sequel. You normally don't get a sequel after 30 years. That's why so many people are cheering.
Okay, but I'm saying that the original
is an awesome movie, though.
Okay, but the original
is awesome.
It's okay. There's not a lot to connect to. I don't feel any sense of anything from it.
Pixel?
I watched it. I experienced it.
You have lost that love and feeling.
Yeah, I didn't have any love and feeling. I had no feeling. It was just, even when Goose died, I had family members who were crying. They were women.
Oh, you cold-hearted bastard! You didn't care about Goose dying.
I wanted to. I like Goose, but it wasn't. I didn't have enough.
Cry. There's no emotion.
I didn't have enough of a connection.
So I think part of the way to connect, and you're supposed to kind of have a different vibe being younger, is that, for example, back in the 80s, you'd go see this movie, the place would be packed, everybody'd be cheering, but later on you'd kind of joke. And, the picture I chose to put up tonight was of Archer, because that kind of reinvigorated the whole danger zone thing and put it out in the mainstream a bit. And I thought it was cute. It was one of those things where Kenny Loggins in the 80s, he started off in the 70s with Michael McDonald from the Doobie Brothers, and they had some fantastic music and hits in the 70s going into the 80s. But he, did the Caddyshack soundtrack. He did some other things. He's probably going to be overlooked as a pop musician, if you want to call him that, or whatever. He did Footloose, let's not forget. So he was a voice of the 80s. And to me, when you would come out of a movie like that, you would joke and goof because you had a good time with people and you bonded with it. You talk about it, especially if you're in school. And unfortunately, Pixel, I guess kind of a different way to get in between you two going back and forth on this is this. I cannot think of a movie that's come out this year that people get a bro kind of guy thing to think is kind of cool and get into, like, where you think, hey, I'm Goose, no, I'm Maverick, I'm this. There's no juvenile kind of thing that, in movies today because movies are so overly trying to message or do something or whatever rather than just be fun, that there's just no fun in it. There's no shtick to it or whatever. And outside from maybe some comedies with Vince Vaughn in them lately that people talk about, it's not like people want
Wow,
to be those characters.
I haven't heard. I think the last bro movie comedy before this was Wedding Crashers.
Wedding Crashers, I think, is interesting because it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
And I say Vince Vaughn because you and I covered RDV's Brawl in Cell Block 99, where it was really brutal and violent. And Vince Vaughn does do things, but like his movie The Breakup's not a comedy. And you thought, oh, well, with Dodgeball, he's like a normal guy, and Wedding Crashers.
He's your average Joe, sir.
Well, if you're 6'5", yeah. I mean, but the point is in the 80s, you had groups of people that had roles, in the John Hughes films. And so people could identify them and they would talk about it and they think they were like a different character.
Yeah.
And so on a more adult kind of young 20s something level, that's what Top Gun was for a lot of people. So Pixel, let me go back to you and ask you this. Is there anything out there like that today?
I mean, no, a lot of things.
So why would I expect you to get this movie? I'm not saying, you don't get it, but what I'm saying is I agree with you. To me, the movie was mid. I thought it was a lot like E.T., where it was completely overrated, but you could not stop how big of a phenomenon it was and how perfect it was as far as 80s films. And you're not supposed to get that because you weren't even around then.
Yeah, you guys are gonna make me set a single tear for your heartlessness.
Like, listen. When a movie is supposed to go for your emotions, try to get that feeling out of you, I can't really put it into words how the original just doesn't hit that mark for me. Like, it's not that it's poorly written, it's not badly acted, it's shot well, it's just not coming together. And
go ahead.
You're not pro-military.
I mean that I am.
Things are not pro-military at all anymore. We kind of mentioned that earlier, but Pixel, I think you're seeing what some people who look back at the 80s and go, I don't get it. What was the thing to it? I mean, I understand what's going on here and all that, but yeah, it's the eye test, as we say. You can look at something, but not having lived it, it's another. It's like analytics in sports. If you haven't played a sport, you can sit there and say something with numbers. Oh, this person's going to do this, but it's not the same thing as being a player out there in the field or the court dealing with it. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people your age are looking back at the 80s and trying to understand it, which I think is cool. No, I mean it with all respect, and because there's nothing out there today that's like it, But there was a lot of 80s movies that, like I say, were complete commercialism, and the Top Gun represents that perfectly. It gave you the platform to really just enjoy stuff. And again, people had fun back then at movies. People don't have fun.
I can understand why he didn't like this movie. He liked Mad Dog Times, remember?
That is a movie that the going ahead and trying to name something that is an experience, let's say.
It's
just not
an experience. It's a nightmare.
It's an experience. But no, like you said about sports. Okay, fine. I've never played football or baseball, but I'm able to watch a movie and enjoy things out of it. Hey, I'm never going to box, but Rocky, that final fight, we are fighting for Rocky at that point. And while 4 isn't my favorite, there's definitely that feeling of this is the fight for America here. And I just don't feel that from Top Gun. I don't.
Let me ask you this though. We covered Maverick first, actually, when it came out this year in 2022, right?
Yeah. I wasn't there for it, unfortunately.
I know, but what I'm saying is I'm wondering if you had saw this movie first, if it would have made Maverick better or worse for you.
Probably.
I did see this movie first.
Oh, you did?
I watched it before I went to Top Gun Maverick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, I wanted to watch it to get ready for the second one. I knew how big of a deal it was. I know the impact on culture it had. But when I watched it, I had to ask why, because I don't get a lot from it. And it's unfortunate. I wish I could feel what Bankman feels for it.
Well,
I just don't.
So let's talk about the story. It's about a guy. Tom Cruise is, his dad's been missing for what 10 years now. It's a pilot.
Daddy didn't love me.
No, so his dad's been missing. So he decided to go into the Air Force himself. We never get to see his mom, but I love how this is a kid who going in. He has emotional problems as it is. Tom Skerritt becomes kind of a father figure to him a little bit as they're training for Top Gun. Bruce, Goose, and the Michael others has become like a brother to him. And it said like it's just this guy trying to deal with his struggles, and then he loses his friend in the midst of it. He blames himself. Obviously, it has some of a bittersweet ending.
But see, the story that follows it, I feel, has the greater emotional pull. I mean, you have a repeat of that. Goose obviously dies in this movie, and so his son has to grow up without his father, and you feel that weight on that character.
I'll not deny that the second movie is better because it built off the first one, which was already great.
But oh gosh, okay, this is the slightest thing I'm gonna come to being political. Okay, it's building back better.
No, stop. That's a horrible. You don't even get it from the.
I know.
Well, here's one of the things to kind of put in perspective, because you made a statement there, kind of like a question, and I think it's very important for the whole Top Gun phenomenon. And one of the only other movies that I recently in the past 20, 30 years I can think of that kind of had a similar phenomenon to it was, and again, people have very divisive opinions about this film here, and that would be Titanic, where Titanic came out, looked great, had some things that people loved, some people hated it. But what happened when that movie came out is word of mouth. And then a phenomenon happened where instead of it releasing to say 3,000 theaters, and then after a week or two it goes down to 2,500, whatever the ratios are depending on how well it's doing, actually more people went to go see it and see Titanic a second time or even a third time, or they would take their dates or whoever, and so the number of screens kind of increased. And the thing is Top Gun was that way too. When it came out and it was popular and this and that, but it made like 20, 30 times its budget, which is unheard of. It was that friggin' popular. And like I say, when you would hear, Take My Breath Away from Berlin, and it's like, here, from the new upcoming soundtrack starring Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis and blah, 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 blah. It's Take My Breath Away with Berlin here on Casey Kasem's Top 40 on the Saturday afternoon. All that kind of programming that you would hear, literally, would kind of almost make you go, yeah, I just have to see Top Gun. It's just a question of when. And again, we've talked about how movies come and go so quick, the streaming situations now.
Mm-hmm.
So it was more of an event. And then when people went, yeah, I had fun, or it's really cool. And the fact that back then you had a lot more positivity about people that were in the military. It's not this fake phony, thank you for your service that people say today just to say something and all that. That was a lot more popular. And so the fact that they went into this and it did have a bit of a military thing, that being kind of absent or really glossed over in Maverick, the second film, I actually think it's a slight negative for it, because it doesn't need to be there. And only because it builds on the first one is it that way. The second one's no way pro-military like the first one. And I think, if it were, it wouldn't have made $1 billion. I really do believe they watered it down intentionally for it. Because, in the 80s, fuck yeah, America, number one. We don't care what. It doesn't matter. We've talked about it with Red Dawn. We've talked about it. We'll send Chuck Norris over. He'll destroy everybody. We saw Rambo going and saving people.
Invasion USA.
Left behind. Fuck yeah. I mean, come on. Bring it right now. Everybody who could invade America at one time. And in the 80s, nobody would have survived. I mean, that was the whole thing, especially with the Cold War. And unfortunately, the way the world is today, much like the same in the 80s, but just America seems weaker, or at least the perception of other countries have of America. You don't have that patriotic feelings that people have for America that you did back then. And that is an element of this film that I know you're saying you don't get, or I don't see why it's glamorized. But
Also,
that wasn't propaganda back then. That was the real deal. People really did feel that popular about saying, "Hey, no, it's cool to serve the country." Back
yeah,
then.
there was only one movie other than this. That was we talked about. That was Iron Eagle.
Yeah. Which I
Otherwise,
think came out before this movie, actually, if I remember
yeah.
correctly.
But other than this, so yeah, there wasn't really anything like this. Yeah, there were movies, but they're all ground assaults. You know, Chuck Norris doing martial arts stuff. You know, through canon films. You had horror. That was the other big thing. You had the John Hughes movies coming out. Then somehow we just went away from all that and just kept the horror movies, and then kept some of the comedies, and then we went into the superhero stuff. So it's like, this is a fresh breath of air, and I'll just like to see that they actually came out with a sequel, because everything's been cookie cutter movies for the past 20 years.
Yeah. This was, I mentioned, Berlin's Take My Breath Away, how big that was. Kenny Loggins, I kind of got away from talking about. The guy's got some great music. You may not be a fan of him and his style and all that.
I agree, Dave.
Well, the thing with I want to bring it with Kenny Loggins is I said, I don't remember the video to Danger Zone. Let me pull that up, right? So I wanted to go ahead and do it, and I'd forgotten how this was a thing. And we're tying this back to Miami Vice earlier, and what we were talking about with the Prisoner earlier pixels. This there became a thing where we know when people copycat stuff, it's effective. And the way to convey a summer movie is, okay, it's the summer, it's hot, it's sweaty. We got to have sweaty, oily bodies. We'll have a beach scene in here so we can show everybody's young hunkiness and appeal to the gay crowd and all that, which they did for both. We'll have beautiful women. They weren't ashamed to have that in there. But then when you watch Kenny Loggins' video for that, you can argue whether or not certain artists should be on camera in a video, but that was something that happened a lot more back then. So Kenny Loggins immediately was starting off with Danger Zone. Is exactly how the movie starts off, which RDV had mentioned earlier. But the thing that was really iconic for summers to capture that feeling was old rickety ass metal fans that looked like they were 50 years old already, and some mist in the air and some sort of cotton or linen. And the reason why I bring that up is because you can see Kenny Loggins in the video doing that, and you see all the moisture in the air while he's singing before he gets into the chorus, and he's just like laying on a bed. It's like, but everyone's like, "Oh, did you see that Kenny Loggins video, Danger Zone?" Hell yeah, bro. It was really cool. And of course, Whitesnake had it in some of their videos too, like in Still of the Night with on Katane dressing in front of the fan. It was a thing. But people learned that if I put certain imagery with it and played around with it, it would just work emotionally without having to explain it or anything else. Top Gun has all that. It is about the imagery. It's not supposed to be
the music, the jets.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what Iron Eagle was, the jets and the music.
Yeah.
And like I said, like every time I see them, like, when they're Chester's dead. It's like, when they're going through the cannon stuff and just doing stuff. He's doing the vertical flips. They're taking a photo of the other pilots. And then he's explaining, it's like, it was a perfect role for Tom Cruise, because he was so cocky as heck as Maverick in this. It was actually like made for him. And you watch behind the scenes in this, you see clips of this actually behind the scenes in that Val Kilmer movie that's by A24, because Val Kilmer, he was recording everything behind the scenes. He had his first camcorder, so he was recording stuff behind the scenes. And it was kind of cool because he was talking about Top Gun, and says they were there. They were on the water. They're on the aircraft carrier and stuff. It's like, it wasn't just like a stage. So it's like the first time ever they actually had like a movie on a carrier, because remember, the military is so private. They don't want any good secrets getting out on stuff. So it was cool. And that said, the story might have been a little weak, but I just love at the you got the F-16s, you got the MiGs. You just got Buzz in the Tower. Obviously, if you did that, you're grounded. You're never flying again the first time. I guarantee you, to never watch a pilot, an actual Air Force pilot, criticizing Top Gun or any of these movies, because it just kills the movie for you. Because these guys are like, yeah, that'll never happen. It's like watching a movie with firefighters, or a cop, your spouse is a cop. That's not real. That's not real. It's like, dude, it's Hollywood. It's like,
well, that is something that's important. You want to have an impact.
Yeah.
And while visually, yeah, it does. Them flying, it is cool. The actually seeing them go off, yeah, that is cool. But when the story doesn't support what is visually pleasing, it just doesn't. For me, it doesn't give me anything.
Well, I can relate because that's pretty much the MCU for me. It's visually pleasing, but the story's not that great.
That's another conversation.
But there's an element here, like we talked about, the way we look through, the filter of a movie. Do we like it versus, do we think it's good for what's attempting to be done here, or how coherent is it?
Yeah.
And one of the things of the 80s is, and I'll relate it to a sports figure. There was a tennis player in the 80s as the game of tennis was changing called Andre Agassi, and he was known as being a very flamboyant showman. And he's from Central Florida area over in Tampa. He went to a school there. And he was a young guy right out of high school. Technically, he was going to a camp, the voluntary school. And he was a very young guy that at the time, that was pretty much unheard of, where, you would go to college normally, then try to make it on the tour and all that. And his catchphrase, which became kind of an anti-80s thing, but again, it summed up the 80s, the new version of it was image is everything. And he was a guy that was so marketable with this kind of attitude, and it was an 80s attitude that a lot of old timers and people that liked older sports were like, well, there's just absolutely a way we can get behind him because he hasn't done anything in the sport. He doesn't have credibility because he hasn't won. Now, he was super talented, and eventually he matured and won and actually had a great second half of his career, one of the few sports stars to do so. But I always thought he was a great example of somebody that went up against, older idols that I liked. And there's a bit of a changing guard with that in sports too. We talk about Lakers, Celtics rivalry is the best in the NBA, and Michael Jordan, as much as everybody would call him the GOAT, now younger people like Pixel's age would say LeBron is, which is a joke. Back then in the 80s, I'm telling you, image pretty much overtook story for a lot. And so to Pixel, I would sit there and say, I don't disagree with you about the story element, but I've always kind of maintained for me that story can be a little too important, because if you don't care for the characters or you're not drawn into film, whether it's because you're seduced by something visually or whatever, then who really gives a rat's ass? Because let's be honest, anything that I don't particularly care for that you guys sometimes cover on your other channels with Marvel and DC is, I go, they're superheroes, how can I relate to them? And yet I like monster movies and this and that, but there's just different ways of doing it. And back then in the 80s, oh my God, you had all the selection of things. If you weren't into the military stuff or Rambo, or I thought Top Gun was just USA propaganda and full of shit or not realistic, there's tons of other crap to go get into. And unfortunately, you don't have those options today.
Yeah, interesting. Two interesting facts about this movie. The scene where Goose dies, he never would have died like that because canopies come clear off. He would, if his thing wouldn't go, they would have. The pilot can actually like pull it all the way off if he wants to before he jumps out. The other thing is that scene where they go in the water with he's holding Goose. Tom Cruise almost died, he almost drowned because the parachute got caught around him. So filming that. So that's kind of realistic there too. But like I said, the jet scenes is so awesome, and I can't think of any other movies offhand where you actually, other than Iron Eagle, where you actually had fighter pilots and stuff, jets like that, in the movie. So like I said, that it was a visual for me as far, and then the soundtrack, some of the scenes, the Goose dying is very freaking emotional, man. Now, and seriously, you think about it. These guys in the military, you're training with that guy for how many months, and then you're going in there, and then you become like family. And then so the fact that Maverick felt responsible for killing him, not Meg Ryan can look at him, he just felt like shit. You identify. So I'm just saying, anybody who's been in that situation, or even who's in the military served, they know what that's like. What could I have done wrong? What could I have done better?
I understand
the fact that you didn't cry just means you're heartless.
I understand that, but at the same time, you just undercut his death by saying that could never happen.
But see, you didn't even know that though. So
no, I didn't. But I said I didn't feel it. I didn't laugh when he died. But I did laugh at at what you just said by undercutting his death.
Oh.
Well, so another thing too is, as we mentioned this before with Iron Eagle, and I think there's a lot of appropriate crossover elements here too. And I think not all 80s movies had it, and certainly not hardly any movies do today. But in the 80s, you still had a bit of an old school mentality where actions have consequences. Yeah, you might be talented, you might be cocky, and again, Tom Cruise is perfectly captured at that. Same thing in Color of Money, which I think is one of his better movies, would come out pretty soon after this. with Paul Newman, the pool shooting one. It's, you see him and he's tormented and it's a buddy, and to pile on the whole thing, we're in a world now today where everybody's supposed to be special or equitable, or I don't even know what the hell the message is because it's certainly not consistent. But back in the 80s, you had a sense of, you know what, I'm good. Yeah, but I need to be the best, or I need to be number one, or I need to be better than you. Or the whole thing with competition is that was healthy because it would bring out the best of whatever it is that you could have. Now, that doesn't mean, you would be better than somebody else, but the 80s, for the most part, took what I would consider a positive look at that. And so when we talk about the movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas, the famous quote that everyone always misinterprets is when he says greed is good. And he talks about how greed's not evil. It's just some, people wanting to accomplish stuff because it gives you a vision. It gives you a sense of something to accomplish, and you don't know what you can do until you try it. So it's about rising up and figuring out where your boundaries are at. And when you're at an elite level school like Top Gun and you're the best of the best, you're by nature super competitive. You are the best of the best. Now it's, hey, where do I fit into this group of things? Because I might be great and talented, but I can't do what I want to do or accomplish it without the help of others. So again, I'm defending it in the sense of, there's some good moral values in there with it. Whereas today, the whole anti-hero thing's super popular and kind of a joke in a way too, because it doesn't send a message of, hey, you do need other people to help you out that just aren't there to, be a cardboard cutout character. And, I think we see that a little bit in this film.
I would argue, I'm just going to say, I would argue that, again, that's done better. That's portrayed better in the sequel compared
I agree with you.
We're not talking about the sequel, though. We're talking about the first movie, though. So comparing it. But I'll ask you, since you didn't like this movie, what parts did you like?
I mean, I did enjoy their friendship. I did enjoy the brotherhood of Maverick and Goose. Absolutely. And so when Goose died, obviously that's going to have an impact for Maverick. I just, that was the highlight. That everything else just, it didn't hit for me. It just didn't.
Soon we'll be doing our year in review, just to kind of say what we thought some of the better films are of this year, because we've talked about some that we've seen or we're wanting to see. We've done that a little bit. And I think Top Gun Maverick 2 is probably one of the better films of this year. So it got me
I can
to
name
thinking,
3 offhand. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I'm like,
so far, of all the ones I've watched, 3 offhand that I actually like.
Well, I was wondering if the original Top Gun were released now. 2 things: 1, how good would it do at the box office? And 2, would it be automatically one of the better films of this year? Because the thing is a lot of older people would go see the original one, and once in a while you would get, back in the 80s, you'd get a movie from the 50s that'd be like, okay, special 30th year edition. You're going to go see Vincent Price's House of Wax, or you're going to see something else that would get put into a theater for like a special engagement. And sometimes around the holidays you might get something like that, an old school classic. But a part of me goes, wow, $1 billion for Maverick. Why wouldn't they do a limited release now of the original one? Because it's right now it's at critical mass.
I would release it back to back. Like, remember they used to do it for the Adventure movies, MC movies. You could watch the first one in the theater and then watch the second one. Sometimes remember the Lord of the Rings, you could watch like 9 hours in the theater.
Yes.
As it come out.
The Dream.
The Dream. It's a lot of walking.
The Pixel, that made me want to ask you, like I say, as a younger guy now, would this upset you that, oh my God, they're re-releasing a movie from the 80s that wasn't that good, just because the current one's doing really well? Would you feel like it's an insult to movies today if they re-released Top Gun, the original?
Why would I feel that way?
I'm asking. I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
Just because I don't feel for something, it doesn't mean I can deny an impact that it has. It would do well. A re-release of the original would do well based off of essentially just how Maverick did. If Maverick didn't come out, do I think it would do half as well as it would? No, I don't.
Do.
You do? Okay.
Absolutely, without question.
I think we talked about this 2 weeks ago when we talked about this movie, Maverick. The reason Maverick did so well because of all the movies that come out right now and all the stuff coming out, this was unapologetically like bro movie. They didn't give a crap. Yes, people were saying, oh, why does he have the Taiwan patch he put back on? He said, screw you, China. He put Taiwan, because Taiwan's a country, back on his back. This movie, the new movie Maverick is so unapologetically being pro-America, where you find other movies they kind of cater, or they kind of like cater different like, I guess not catering, but like pandering to different groups of political people, as far as like, basically I would say like there's a lot of woke, and that's kind of what and it ruins it. Whether it has a good storyline is just that when you start putting stuff in there, doesn't need to be in there, you can start to notice it, and like I said, it's really brings down the movie. This had none of that. Like I said, they basically said, this is my balls, you're gonna look at them, you don't like it, too bad, they're there, I'm a guy.
Okay.
Yeah. Saying the most important thing is that Jennifer Connelly is in it. Yeah, Jennifer for me has always kind of achieved almost Diane Lane status. I mean, she started in the movie I think called Phenomenon '85. I think that was Dario Argento, and then she started to grow up. I'll just simply say that in a few films a little bit later. But I think some people were upset with Jennifer because, one, she's so incredibly good looking that I know that triggers some people today, when back in the 80s it wasn't a big deal. But they're like, well, she doesn't have anything to do in this film. Well, yeah, and your point is, does she have to?
So here's what I'm going to say to that, though. I think that the relationship between our main character Maverick and his love interest in Top Gun Maverick is better than in the original. I think that his relationship with her, it hits at a deeper level. It hits.
I would acknowledge that, and I would also, on the flip side, sit there and say I could make a complete argument for Kelly McGillis as being a stunner in that film, that she is shown to be a much stronger, independent type woman. And I could actually argue that the Connelly version in this film is just made to be there just for what you're saying, and that's it. So, I mean, what do you want? Do you want a woman that's beautiful and, what was she, a physicist, just something, an instructor? She was a strong woman in a man's world back in the 80s, as opposed to Connelly that's now an independent hear me roar, I'm independent, strong business owner type, single mommy alert. And even though it's Jennifer Connelly, I mean, which role model do you think is the better one? I mean, I could argue for the Top Gun version.
I want to point out, because the writing of this, because in the first movie he went for Kelly McGillis, who's much older than him.
Cougar alert.
So in this movie, Jennifer Connelly, his character, who actually was mentioned in the first movie, was a teenager at the time when he was in the Air Force.
Yes.
So he became the older lion looking for the cub.
No, she wasn't that much younger.
Good 5 to 10 years.
But the way to describe her age in here. So if he's like that age and keep going forward, he's at least about 20 years older than her, or 15.
He's not 20 years older than her.
Not Jennifer Connelly, but the character, though. The character was how old do you think he was in this movie? His character?
I'm not sure, but it's still the case.
I mean, really, it's younger.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the bottom line. So, but I wanted to ask you guys this too, because when you mentioned that, it made me think of something that I wanted to ask you guys, because I'm the fact that here in Central Florida our theaters are open and a lot of people are going back now, thanks to this film. I would sit there and say that the biggest scene that people laughed the most, or seemed like they enjoyed the most, and it kind of took me by surprise, and I didn't have a problem with it, but I was expecting it to be like a particular action scene where people would clap or whatever, like they did at the end of the film. But it was when he was almost like a teenager, where he's having to escape at night out of the window and climb down, and the daughter caught him or whatever. Everyone kind of laughed and thought that was funny. Everyone really, really liked that scene. I mean, how did the audiences take that where you guys saw it?
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah, everybody laughed, especially when the daughter's like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, but then there is that serious tone that follows it. Don't break her heart. And I can feel more for Maverick's relationship and what he's trying to maintain, while also measuring it against him trying to teach these people to live, because if they do this mission, they're going to die if they can't do it properly. So I just feel more for the second. In the original, I don't know. Everything just doesn't work.
Explaining it, yeah.
I look at, as I said, as you described this many times, the first movie is not a dramatic movie, only than that scene where the goose dies.
Yes,
but it's basically a bro movie, having fun, just goofing off. Like, stuff you could never do in the Air Force, but they're doing it because we're America. Heck, F yeah, bro. So the second movie became more dramatic. They went away from the comedy as much as the first one had.
Okay.
That's why people say, like, the first movie, it's just a dumb toxic masculinity bromance, movie. It gets written off as that because people don't understand.
Well, the biggest thing I would say about the films
a
is
lighthearted
that,
movie.
We talk about 80s films and certain things are in it. I know that a lot of times on Tuesday nights, Artie, when you and I are doing action films or 80s stuff or whatever, we kind of compare them to other 80s films that we've talked about. The comment was made earlier tonight about how Top Gun was a great movie for capturing, the spirit of the times and what it is. And I look at Maverick today and I go, while it's mature and yes, a more serious movie and better movie and more dramatic, and I agree with all those things. I don't disagree with any of it. A part of me goes, you know what? It still only exists because of the original movie and because of Tom Cruise. So part of me says, if this movie was never made, there's not a movie I can think of over the past several years that has done the same thing that a popcorn movie like Top Gun did in '86, which is what I would call, quote unquote, a perfect '80s film for the way it captured everything at that time, a slice of the pop culture at the time. It's hard for me to sit there and say that there's anything recent like that that's captured anything like that for modern America, and that's where I'm lost. Everything is MCU or DC for the most part. I'm sick of it.
I would agree, but in the part I'd say something that came close to us was Ghostbusters Afterlife.
But that was an '80s franchise. I'm saying something that exists for like the
so differently,
right?
I'd say I'd say the Batman's pretty good. I mean, but that's my number. As far as
the reboot,
they're all reboots.
Top Gun was original property, capturing the '80s at the time. Is there something that's original now that's captured the current time in the past 5-10 years? I have a tough time thinking of that. Maybe something exists, but I can't, and that's a problem, isn't it? You have a movie that's based off of almost something 40 years old that comes and makes $1 billion and slaps the shit with anything that's out in theaters today. And it's like, wow, are you kidding me?
Well, no, the thing is that the difference is that back in the '80s, we had a lot of, I'd say, good movies with bad stories. But they were, you know what I mean?
That's a great tagline because it's true.
You know what I mean? Like, if we watch all those canon movies.
Canon classics, baby.
The Italian, heartthrob from Ninja.
Enter the Ninja with Frank Nero, and then Revenge of the Ninja, which is the greatest ninja movie of all time.
Goonies is beloved, but it's a horrible movie.
How do you feel about that, Pixel? Are you a Goonies guy?
He just died.
I've actually never seen Goonies, so I don't know. I'm torn in this conversation because this conversation is leaning away from the movie itself.
Yeah, I know.
If we want to talk about these times, I'm not a particular fan of the world right now, and that's not going into particulars at all. Just with how the world is right now, I don't think there's the closest you're going to come is to a movie that's utterly ridiculous, because people are ridiculous now. At least the loud ones are. Of course, there's a majority that will go see movies like Top Gun Maverick and just live in that moment, and they'll enjoy that. I definitely say there were excellent releases this year. I mean, if we wanted, I thought Everything Everywhere All at Once, even though it's A24, it was quite a good film. I think The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, a comedy, but it still had a touch to it that hit. It was great. There are good movies still. I'm not going to say that Top Gun Maverick is definitely one of the better ones. It's definitely one of the best ones. And I think that's just the 80s living on, but there's still things that are coming out now that are still worth seeing.
And to be fair, in the 80s, there was a lot of reboots of 60s movies and 50s movies in the 80s.
Absolutely. That's
something was really original there too. A lot of them, yeah. But as far as, I can't really think of movies, but I know TV series though. The Boys has been one of the most talked about thing ever. Stranger Things,
Yeah, boy, that's really gone downhill a lot, very fast. I mean, and I've watched it, so
but like I said, there's still TV and movies that are really popular today, but it's not. I mean, of course, if you bring back something like that was great in the '80s and bring it back into here and push it up against stuff that's been like kind of cookie cutter mediocre, like how many Paranormal Activity movies are there? Like 13 now. I mean, it just seems like there's so many of the same movie with a different title.
yeah.
And then so when you get something like in the '80s, like I said, you could bring back another Dawn of the Dead. Now, I don't know if it'll do the same as they would in the '80s. I don't know how great they were in the '80s, but it's because it's on this nostalgia factor, and that really helped out Top Gun. And then, and also because Tom Cruise, no matter what, he's proven this with any movie he does, he puts everything into it. He makes it the best there is because he's a perfectionist. Look at every one of his movies he's done with Mission Impossible since the first one. It's gotten better and better.
Yeah, people would argue of the second one with the John Woo, but I mean that's
You just wait for
quibbling
John
over
Woo.
something. Well, no, because I mentioned earlier tonight, as we're getting here to finish up in a little bit, but the idea of competition, when everybody's starting to do that, then other people do the same thing, and I think that happened to a certain extent in films, not necessarily maybe with the scripts, like what Pixel's saying with the stories, because you didn't need much in the '80s. You just needed bro stuff. You needed people to come out having fun, and RDV, you and I have talked about this before. In the '80s, it seemed like it was a lot easier to give people what they wanted in the theater and just make it plausible enough, where now it's about trying to sell people something that they may or may not want, and that's a totally different approach. And if I'm a sales guy and I go through the old classic thing of, I got to get you to say no 4 or 5 times, then I break down wall of resistance, and it becomes a yes just out of sheer fatigue. Well, that's not a way to make people walk away enjoying the transaction. Whereas if you come to me with something, I'm like, sure, hey, let me see what I can do for you, under promise and over deliver. You definitely have that, and that's not how it is in movies today. When something's good, like Pixel mentioned earlier, it's a rarity. Whereas in the '80s, I think you're calling about, there was a lot of okay films with bad stories. I think that's a great description, because I feel the same way about like E.T. as I do the Goonies. I look at it and go, it was nice when I was a kid, but now I'm like, yeah, whatever. It doesn't do it for me anymore.
Flight of the Navigator. There's a lot of movies that came out in the '80s. I mean, we love Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris is great, but you look at the storylines around it. It says we're just waiting for Chuck Norris to kick somebody. That's all we were waiting for. We didn't get the storyline.
Yep.
Especially late '80s, Missing in Action. Everything was all about explosions, Commando. It was just like Rambo, like.
That's what it deteriorated into.
Yeah.
Everything. And it became this substance over style bit that Pixel's talking about, which is true. And that's why I said Top Gun in '86 was like the top film, literally, when it comes to this. Then everything after this was just, there was no more real good '80s films. I mean, there were, but this is just like the peak pinnacle of '80s cheese.
That's why I say, like, Top Gun and Ghostbusters are one of a kinds. It worked so well with the formula of the first one. This movie, it was amazing the fact that they were able to recapture, do basically the same story, update it, and it's just like you saw that it's basically the only thing that's missing is that we didn't get to see Tom Cruise grow up as Maverick. It's like a 30-year, 40-year gap. 40 years later, it's like he still got the same motorcycle and everything. It's like, it's great. Like, yeah, it's like I said, so that's what really helped out this movie too. It was a nostalgia factor, and the fact that you got the same effort they put in the first movie, and they said, you know what, we're going to take it up to 11 with this one.
Yeah, thank you, Spinal Tap. Well, let's close with this. I think the original Top Gun is an okay film, to use Pixel's explanation of mid. I think I said meh. Well, it's close. I mean, it's not one that I go rewatch all the time and go, yeah, I want to watch me some. It's more of a, I know how big it was because I experienced it there too. But Archer bringing back the Danger Zone, and Kenny Loggins is a good musician who's got some great catchy tunes, and he would be one of those guys, if you were a big Deep Purple fan or heavy metal fan like I was, you might not admit to the people at school, hey, this Kenny Loggins song's pretty catchy.
Like I said, they're catchy, and then they're just uplifting, dude. Like, this makes you want to go out. Like, Danger Zone makes you just want to go and drive like 90 miles per hour down on the freeway.
Exactly. But if you haven't seen Top Gun, it's on there too. And Pixel, I think you had the comment of the night. when you shocked everybody in the audience by simply making the statement of, "I've never seen the Goonies." Because you can't say you understand the 80s without having said you've seen the Goonies.
Next Sunday, the Goonies.
Rob, look what you did.
You know, I met my woman on Monday. You could say it was my lucky Monday. You know what I mean there, Dave? Little Spinal Tap reference. Oh my God. Smell the glove. Man, let's bring back memory. Spinal Tap's fantastic. Yeah, Goonies next week sounds like a strong possibility. And that's because you, Pixel, we care about your development and maturity as a young 20. Impressionable is something that you need to get through some of these. At some point, you're going to have to watch the ninja movies too.
We might get Pixel to do the Truffle Shuffle. You know what it is? You've never seen it.
Yeah, maybe Pixel's just too good enough for us. I don't know.
he's gonna come on. He's gonna be eating ice cream at a little plate later.
Yeah, Goonies. I have to admit, I'm not a fan of. There's some things I love and hate about it, and some things that really creep me out. And I've mentioned before, and I'll close with this: I prefer the darker, more cynical stuff of the '80s. I always have, and still do to this day, because there was this love affair in the '80s of making things be about style over substance. Used the Andre Agassi description there too, and unfortunately, I think the '80s were a victim of its own success when it comes to these kind of films. And boy, we paid the price for it in the '90s. And to me, has there been a film after 2000? It's hard to say. But we'll tackle that next week with the Goonies and the Truffle Shuffle and all that cutesy disgusting.
Cyndi Lauper, get ready for it. Josh Brolin.
Yeah, back when he was young. Okay, we'll talk about that. Oh, that scene where he's pedaling the bicycle is
Corey Feldman, Sean Austin.
Yeah, back when Corey was only half abused, but I hate to bring that up.
The best Hobbit.
All right, guys. Hey, I'd like to thank everybody for showing up tonight. Of course, I'd like to thank Pixel for taking a little bit of abuse from us tonight, from RDB from the great Midwest, who did not act very Midwestern today. He acted like he was a Florida boy, like for me, or at least gave him a few big bro shots like we would do in the 80s. Just joking, Pixel. But yeah, Goonies, interesting choice. But before that, we'll have Tuesday night coming when RDB and I are going to come up with something cool and fun. So be on the lookout for that. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for listening. As always, stay extreme.
Maybe we'll dream a little dream.
I will invite everybody Tuesday night to our particular zone of extreme harm, aka Danger Zone.